Hello and welcome. It's Friday night, um, and I want to just thank you for showing up. If you've shown up at 11 o'clock, or if you're watching this on a tape, thanks for doing this. So tonight I'm reading again from the fifth book of the series, Revelry. And the main story in the book is about Francis and Fiona, and they're getting married, and so we're meeting other characters. And the setup for the first scene that I'm reading is Bree and Rowan, and they had just, in the last night I read that they had gone to see Bartholomew Landing, and she could see that it would make a great catering place, and then they had that whole thing, about her thumb. So she's got some feelings coming up, and so this is what she did to take care of herself. She made herself a big bowl of clam dip, devouring it with potato chips and Diet Coke. She was stuffing herself. It had been a long time since she deliberately used food to comfort herself. Today, she felt she had good reason. She scooped the last of the clam dip up with the last potato chip. She just loved it when the dip and chips worked out evenly. Licking her fingers, she stared at her right thumb as if it were a foreign body. She remembered Jimmy Lawrence coming over when she was babying her older sister's twin boys. She was 14 and Jimmy was 13. They were in English class together and he was her best friend. They did silly things that night, sitting on either end of the beige couch, playing pat-a-cake, probably because Bree had been playing that with the 18-month-old twins earlier. She and Jimmy were giggling, laughing as she accidentally slapped him with a pat. He grabbed her right hand and stuck her forefinger in his mouth. She stopped giggling. Her stomach felt like it landed at her ankles, and the parts that her mother and sisters referred to as lady parts felt like liquid, and she squeezed herself together breathlessly. Jimmy intuitively knew something was happening with Bree. Her breath quickened and he wanted to jam her whole hand in his mouth, but all he could do was her thumb. He sucked the skin and between her thumb and forefinger and saw Bree redden and shudder and lick her lips if that was the most amazing thing he could do for her. And they were together until he went away to college and was killed by a drunk driver on his first day of school. Okay, Leonard, pull yourself together. Now bloated and greasy, she was determined to walk off some of it, even though it was after midnight. She set her phone timer for 15 minutes. She'd walk forward 15 minutes, then turn around and walk back 30 minutes. She had a small flashlight clenched in her front teeth, saliva running down the sides of her mouth as she began to walk briskly. She was startled as a barn owl swooshed past her, hurrying for field mice he'd spotted between the apple trees. She could smell the freshly turned earth around the rows of crops near Martha Janine's house. Fiona had explained, oh gosh, I just lost myself. Fiona had explained, sorry about that, that they kept the apple orchards near the house and branched out to bushberries further down the hill and into the flatlands outside of town. Suddenly Bree felt eyes on her. She spun around and found herself face to face with a kit fox. Its face was long and pinched, its eyes golden, unblinking. It was panting quicker than she was, the ribs showing through its scrawny, matted two-tone fur. Its spindly legs splayed as if too tired to keep his body upright. She almost screamed in fright until she realized it was as frightened as she was, and she found herself returning its gaze and felt a communion with the wild creature. She couldn't remember if she was supposed to stare down a wild animal or look away. Simultaneously, she and the kit fox dipped their heads down. a benediction to each other and themselves. Then it circled back from where it came from, disappearing into the shelter of the trees. Pressing her hand over her heart, she burst into tears. "Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you," she said to no one. So the second selection, again from Revelry, is about Rowan and Bree. And Bree's a caterer. She cooks all this wonderful food, and Rowan's been brave and asked her to come over to his little studio for dinner, where he is going to make sandwiches for dinner. And they're going to have a talk about something kind of serious. He turned to her, making his shy confession. "I'm a little intimidated making sandwiches for you, Bree. I don't know much about the whole cooking piece. I just mainly make sandwiches. I'd like to learn." She said, "I couldn't lecture college students about the internment of the Japanese Americans." Leaning on her elbows at the table, she said, "Now would be a good time to teach me about that. I never knew." Taking a sip of water, she asked, "What made you so passionate about it?" Slicing the cheese as thinly as he could, he held up mayo and mustard. Bree nodded for both. He held up a jar of dill pickles, and she smiled. "Oh, yes, please." Carefully making 2 sandwiches, cutting them in triangles, he got 2 paper plates and napkins, bringing everything to the table. "Well, what got me interested was knowing that this valley has a lot of Japanese Americans who are big-time growers. They've been doing what Martha, Janine, and Fiona are just started, diversifying their crops. There's a history of friendships and mutual respect of farming families of all nationalities around here. What happened to the Japanese is a shameful part of our history as far as I'm concerned." He ate a sandwich, at the same time warming up to his topic. His voice was clear, sure, confident. His blue eyes burned with intensity at the atrocity. Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Roosevelt in February 1942 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. If you had even 1/6 Japanese blood in you, you were interred. Straight across the board. It didn't matter if you were an American citizen. Didn't matter if you were just part Japanese. It didn't matter if you were married to a non-Japanese. Noticing her empty plate, he smiled. "I guess I did a good job." She smiled back. "Excellent. Now I want to hear more, and I want coffee. Let's have the dessert I brought." Boiling water, preparing the French press, he brought the dessert fixings to the table, along with more paper plates, silently gesturing to Bree to do the honors. His back to her, he said, "It's way too complicated and long to tell in just one sitting. It's a semester of education. It's a challenge for these young college students. Like, they can't believe something like this would happen in the States. It blows them away. That's the platform for questions for the rest of the year." He poured 2 mugs and sat back at the table, placing one before each of them. Licking her fingers clean of chocolate pudding, Bree prepared their desserts. "So give me, someone who's totally ignorant, a synopsis." He dug into the rich brownies topped with homemade pudding, gathering his thoughts. Basically, people who didn't look white, even though they were born and raised here in this valley, whose families were part of this community, were rounded up like cattle and imprisoned in facilities that were in the worst of locations. It was too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. It destroyed whole families and a way of life. Many lost everything they had worked for in a blink of an eye, just because they didn't look like you or me. It was racism, pure and simple. After Pearl Harbor, people panicked and saw a group of U.S. citizens that didn't look like us, that looked like the Japanese who attacked Pearl Harbor. So those people ended up massed together and treated like criminals. Bree reached over to him. He'd gotten a queer look on his face. He was somewhere else, seeing something else, feeling something else. He looked at her, refocusing, smiling. Sorry, I get pretty out there when I talk about it. My great-great-grandfather, John Slocum, took over 50 acres for a family and gave everything back to them after the camps. Bendigo, my attorney, his family helped a lot of Japanese families by keeping money, jewelry, heirlooms, and land deeds safe until they got back. Looking glum, he added, I've got relatives who helped and relatives who took advantage. Sometimes I feel proud and sometimes I feel ashamed. Well, here's me being put in my place. We weren't taught this in school, Bree said. It's fascinating. He shook his head. Yeah, when it's dealt with at all, it's mainly in the curriculum at the college level. Only occasionally is it taught in high school. Now you know, it's a piece of U.S. history that rarely gets mentioned. Thanks for telling me. I feel like I learned something ugly that happened not so long ago. You'll probably meet some of the Japanese families at the wedding. All the growers know each other. Frances's mom was postmistress for years and she knew everyone. Really, I never knew Frances's mom was a postmistress. When was this? She asked. She got up to clear away the table. She knew that cleanup was going to be pretty easy with no dishes to wash. For a long time, and I remember from grade school and when I left when I was 16, she was still postmistress. He put away the sandwich makings while Bree washed and dried. They stood side by side, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. She playfully leaned into him, her head hitting below his shoulders. He put his arm around her. You know, I've never had a date ask me about the internment camps. You're a pretty cool date, he whispered, kissing the top of her head. So that's the end of that. So the internment camps, you know, I was 17 when I learned of them by myself because I'd spent some time away from the United States, and so I wanted to make sure that I got them into my books, So it's in Revelry and it's also in book 6, which is what we're going to go through next week. So I want to thank you for joining me this week. Don't forget to look at the bottom of the page here, the YouTube page, and if you like us, please click like. You can find information about how to get in touch with your questions and feedback, and I'd love to hear from you anyway. AC is archiving all these live readings, and there's a link to the playlist below as well, along with a link for tomorrow's night's, not tomorrow night because it's Friday night. So for Monday night's link. And I will be back at 11 on Monday night, 11 p.m. Monday night. Have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves. Be safe. Wear a mask. And hope to see you then. Bye.